Hi, Jamie Powell here from INSYDIUM. In this video we're going to be creating this Guilin landscape using TerraformFX in Cinema 4D. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D and we can see that we have the picture viewer docked next to the viewport tab in our scene so that we can easily flick between our work in the viewport to our reference in the picture viewer, and we're going to be doing that a lot in this video. So if we look at this landscape, we can see that we have these beautiful dramatic mountains, and the grid operator is going to be perfect to pick those out of our terrain. We then have these amazing twisting and winding roads, again perfect for the path operator this time, and the TerraformFX Road. Having a look at our composition, we can see we have this diagonal split. We have these foreground objects, so this road and mountain, and then in the background we also have these mountains and this road too. So we can have two terrains. The foreground terrain will be high resolution and the background terrain is going to be low resolution to keep our scene nice and optimized. Okay, so let's start by going to the viewport, and in order to create this very three-dimensional road that we have, we're going to use two view panels. So let's go to the viewport, we'll go to the panel tab, arrangement, and let's choose two views side by side. We want the right hand side view panel to be the top mode, and on the left let's go to the cameras tab and choose front. So now we can use the top view on the right to design and draw the road, and then the front view, so the side view on the left, to change the elevation of the points to match our terrain. So let's create that Z shape. We'll create the first point, second point, bend it down and around. Let's push that just a little bit further over. And we'll get to the apex of our first corner. Then if we go to the left-hand view panel, we can click E and start to drag this down to add that verticality. So let's continue with our road over here. Let's bring that down again. And we can keep going like this until we have our road finished. So let's jump forward to the point where we have a finished road and continue from there. Okay, so once you've finished your spline, you should end up with something that looks similar to this. Let's just jump out of our camera and have a look at our spline. So you can see we have this descending spline, then it wraps around those mountains over there on the back. Let's jump back into our camera, which has been framed up to roughly match that of our reference image. Now let's go ahead and create a terrain. So TerraformFX, terrain. And we can just delete those default operators. We can go into our terrain again, and let's turn off the display mode. We'll change the size on the X to 1250, and on the Z, let's go for 1000. And let's increase the segments respectively. Now let's add the grid operator. We need to be in Cinema 4D's model mode rather than the points mode in order to see the points that make up our grid. So let's go back into our picture viewer and start to pick out some of these areas in our mountain that we can raise up. So let's raise up this area first. And this area is just by that first bend on the Z area of our road. And also the bottom bend is between those 2 points. So let's go back to the viewport. We'll jump out of our camera again. Let's actually just make our spline a different color so that we can pick it out a little bit easier in the viewport. And we'll hide the camera as well. Okay, so we need to be raising up this area here. Let's go to our grid, and we don't actually have a point that's available there, so let's increase the grid resolution. We'll go to the properties tab and let's increase this to 10 and 10. Now of course we could use the grid brush to paint in the elevation of our grid, but let's just start by picking out some of these manually. So we'll raise this up in our scene, and let's go back into our camera, go back to the picture viewer. Now we'll take this point up, which sits on the other side of the road, and bring it up even higher. So again, let's just jump out of our camera, and it's over here that we want to be lifting up, so let's take that all the way up, and this point too. And actually the road goes through the middle of these, so actually it needs to be abridged here at the top, and we'll allow the path operator to eat into that. So let's bring all of these points up even higher. Okay, that looks good. Let's jump back into the camera and assess. Okay, this point's a little bit too high. Let's start to just raise some of these a little bit more. And now let's create this area, which is hugely raised up. So to raise this whole area, let's jump into the grid brush. And we're going to change the fall off shape first. So let's delete these central points. We'll take this handle and pull it out. Because if you look in the picture view, you can see that we have these very rounded tops on the mountains. And then they fall off like so. So this handle needs to come out to create that fall off. There, that's looking good. Okay, now let's increase the radius of our brush and elevate this whole entire area of the scene. Okay, it needs to come up a little bit further. So we'll take the airbrush mode into elevate, jump out of our camera again, and continue to elevate that area until we're happy with the result. So we can go back to the grid operator at any point, of course, but let's just make sure that we have this nice dip ready to go for our scene. And then we're going to add some noise operators to add some definition to the scene as well. So let's go to our terrain. Of course, we need to be in the viewport. And we're going to create a gradient operator. This is going to create that huge dip that we see in the scene. So let's move this over here towards the right-hand side. And we're actually going to have a terrain over here in the background. So our gradient can be absolutely huge. Let's go for 1500. We'll take it all the way over here. Let's go to the Operators tab and change the mode to subtract. And let's increase the gain to 1000. And if we go to the Properties tab, we can change the fall off curve. So let's take this handle back. We'll bring this handle out. And let's compare with our picture viewer. Perfect. Now let's go to our terrain, and we're just going to add a noise operator. Let's put this noise operator first in the hierarchy. We'll keep all of our noise operators there at the top. And we want to be creating this treetop deformation for our terrain. So let's go back to the viewport, and we'll go to the Properties tab and change the noise type to Narky. And let's reduce the scale. So let's go for 60. Increase the octaves to 8. And we'll go to the Operators tab and reduce the gain to 20. So that looks good, but we need to double up our noise. We need to have another noise to disrupt this noise. So let's create another noise operator. And in the Properties tab, we'll change the noise type to Rigid Multifractal. And let's invert this. If we turn off the first noise, you can see that we have these really nice bulbous shapes deforming our terrain. So again, let's reduce the scale. Let's go for an even smaller scale this time, like 40. And let's reduce the gain even more. And then turn on our first noise. We get this really cool disruption in our mountains. Now, before we continue, we need to make sure that both of our noise operators are set to global. This will ensure that our noises will line up with our background terrain, because the noise itself has been globalized rather than relative to the terrain's position. So now those are set up, let's go to our terrain, and before we create the background, we're going to be creating our path operator. So let's bring that into the scene, and now we just need to bring our spline into the path operator to see how it's working already with our terrain. So let's rename our spline foreground path spline. And in our path operator, we can drag and drop this into the spline link field. Now we're going to see the carving into the mountain and this extrusion out to meet the path as well. Now we need to increase the width. Let's go for 70. Then we can change this curve to match that of our reference. So let's pull this handle nice and far out. And then we'll reduce the length of this handle. Now we get this really beautiful sloping inwards on that path. So if we compare this to our reference, we can see that we just need to make a few more adjustments to our grid. And that's going to be to drop this area down, increase the height of some of these parts of the grid operator, and also reduce the height of this area too. So we'll use the airbrush mode set to off so that we can pinch and pull the specific areas in our terrain. So let's just jump out of the camera and pull some of these areas down. We'll pull this area down too. And let's jump out of the airbrush mode so we can select this point and bring it down manually. Let's jump back into our camera and just see how that compares. So we have that really nice sharp face on that area of the mountain. We can pull this area up a little bit. So let's jump out of the camera again. That's nice. So let's increase the resolution of our grid again to 15 by 15. This is going to allow us to have a little bit more precision in sculpting those specific areas of our grid. Okay, now let's just increase the height of this area. We use the grid brush to do that. Let's elevate, increase the radius, and we'll paint it in. Okay, let's jump out of the airbrush and just pinch and pull those areas up actually. Okay, so let's take these areas of our path and just push them over towards the right hand side. And that's going to improve the placement of our road. So go to our path spline to do that. We'll select these points. So this one, and this one. And we'll just pull these over. Let's see how that looks. Even further. We can bring them down as well and rotate them slightly too. Cool, that's looking good. So last thing to do is just to slightly increase this point over here on the grid operator again. So grid, go back to the model mode, just increase that height. Okay, and now let's just fill in this area. So again, let's jump out of the camera and bring this point up. Just going to fill in that area of the road. Because if we go back to the picture view, we can see that it slopes down from there. So we'll bring that point up. Bring some of these points up too. And you can see that as we change these points, we're really starting to sculpt the grid operator to behave just how we want it to. So we can look back on our reference and say, oh, well, this area here is higher than this area. It's very easy to simply go back into the grid operator and make those changes. You have a lot of versatility. Okay, so that's looking great. Let's go to our terrain and we're going to add an erosion operator. And for the mode of the erosion, we're going to change it to hydraulic 2D particles. And this is going to use particles to simulate rainfall and erode channels in our terrain. So let's update some of the settings to fine-tune this effect for our scene. So if we go to the erosion drop-down menu, we want to change the erode life curve. And that's because the default curve is making it so that the particles will erode more the older they get. We want to make them erode more strongly earlier on in their life. So we're going to take the curve and update it to this shape here. And we can instantly see the effect update in the viewport. Now let's go to the lifetime and half this so that they live for less time. And we're also going to increase the radius to get some larger channels. And if we also decrease the capacity and let's also half the erosion as well. We're going to be reducing the effect of the erosion on our landscape. Right, so let's go to the path operator and we're going to create some road geometry. When we do that, our road becomes available in the scene and create a road material. And in this material, we'll just go to the color tab and let's just reduce the strength of the road color shader just so that we keep this in our Cinema 4D default gray color scheme for now. Now let's go back to the road and we're going to reduce the height to something very low like 0.2. And it's the extend that we're going to utilize in order to make sure that, for example, we have this bridging area here. Now we can reduce the width so that we are sat on top of the path. Increase the curvature to round our road out. And now here's a nice little trick. We're going to duplicate our path spline and we're going to call this road spline. And if we go to the road, we can swap this out. We're not going to see a change yet, but that's because we have now got our two separate splines. So let's hide our path spline. We can make changes to our road spline just to make sure it's sitting exactly where we want it to sit in our scene. So let's drop these points down a little bit further. Let's pull this point up to create that beautiful bridge. Then we'll just make a few more minor adjustments to refine the road further. Okay, let's reduce the extension of our road. So let's take this down to 4. And we're going to change the fall off curve on our path just so that we have a little bit more room for our road. So let's decrease this handle and we'll move this one over. And then we'll increase the density of the resampled points that are making up our path. So put that at 85 and we'll just decrease the width to, let's say, 60. And now we can see that the road is being hugged by that path. When we were engineering our terrain and building in our operators, we created the erosion operator last. And that means, in this case, that we are eroding away our path. So let's put the erosion higher up in the hierarchy so that the path is escaping that erosion. And now you can see we've got rid of all of that tearing that was occurring in our path. Okay, so let's create our background terrain. In order to keep the settings, let's just duplicate our foreground terrain. Let's call this background. And we're going to delete all of its child operators and go to the Object tab. Let's change the size to 3,333 on the X, 1,000 segments on the X. And then let's just go for 3,000 on the Z and leave that segment count to 1,000. In the coordinates, we need to push this over to 2,000 centimeters on the Z. And if we jump out of our camera, we're going to see that these terrains are perfectly aligned. But of course, it's the operators that are displacing the foreground terrain away from the background terrain. So let's copy the noise operators, the erosion operator, and the gradient operator, paste them into the scene, and we're going to place those directly into our background terrain. Let's just rename that noise. Fold these down, jump back into our camera, and we can see that we have that nice alignment of our terrain. Right, let's go to the Viewports Filters tab and turn off the work plane. Let's also take off the world axis, and we'll go to our background terrain, the Add Operators tab. Let's choose the Grid operator. We need to be in our Cinema 4D's model mode. And let's just go back to the picture viewer and see what we want to do. So we have this nice dip in our terrain that's caused by the gradient operator. But we need to bring in these mountains. So let's go from right to left. We have this mountain on the right. It peaks around here. So where we have this subdivision surface button, that's really where we want our mountain to peak. So we'll go back to the viewport. Let's increase the grid count. Let's say 20 by 20. And we'll go to the grid brush. Let's turn this to off, increase the radius, and so it's around here that we need this to peak up. So let's jump out of the camera, and let's just reduce this area and peak up this area here on the right. If we jump back into the camera, we can see that we've gone a bit too far. Let's bring that down, bring this area down too. Okay, it's going to be a little bit high, but it's pretty close. So we can just bring some of those areas in and out manually. We can definitely go a little bit lower on this area. So let's just reduce that radius size. So if you have a middle mouse button, you can click and drag that to increase and decrease your radius size on the go. So you click and drag horizontally to increase or decrease your radius, or vertically to increase or decrease the strength. Let's create this area. So we need to bring down our mountains a little bit further and create this peak here. So let's go out of the camera again, increase our radius and bring this area really far down. We'll decrease the radius, and let's just bring this point up and see how that looks in the camera. Okay, it's pretty close. It's a little bit high and a little bit over to the left, so let's fix that. We'll bring up some of these points, reduce the height on those points there. You can see it's really a case of just painting in these mountain peaks. Let's compare that. Perfect. Okay, let's get this little secondary point at the back here. So we can reduce our radius really low and just create that point over there in the background. Okay, that's pretty close. Let's get this area. So we have this nice 45 degree and then a sheer drop off, and then these twin peaks here at the top. So let's jump out of the camera, go back to the viewport. Grid operator, of course. Let's see if we can create that really flat area. There we go, that's good. And let's bring this area of that mountain up. We have those twin peaks. Okay, it's a little bit high. So let's just change the grid brush mode to elevate, jump out of our camera and hold down Control to reduce the elevation wherever our grid brush is. So it's much further down actually. And we'll continue to refine this until we're happy. So let's skip forwards to where we have this finished. Then we'll create these little peaks in the background. Airbrush mode sets off, jump out of the camera. Let's go in nice and tight here, reduce the radius and pull up 2 peaks. So we'll pull up this area. Okay, let's just reduce the elevation on all of that. Right, let's create this drop down. Then we'll create this mid-ground mountain. And then lastly, we'll create this huge area at the back. So let's jump out of the camera. Go back to the grid operator again. And let's go to the grid brush. Airbrush mode sets you off. Pinch and pull this area down. And we're going to just continue to pull that down to refine that mountain and make it more accentuated. And then this mid-ground between our background mountains and our foreground mountains can be dropped as well. And that's going to allow us to just increase that sense of depth between our foreground and background. So let's just continue to drop that, and it's going to join with that lower valley caused by the gradient operator. Now let's create that central mountain. If we jump back into our camera, we can see that we need that central mountain here in the middle. So we'll jump back into our grid brush tool and reduce its radius, and then bring that central mountain up, and it has that really long valley that will join our gradient operator. So let's just reduce the height of that mountain again and bring that long stretch in from the bottom of the mountain, and there, that's going to look brilliant. Now we can go into the smoothing brush. So we'll go into the grid brush and change the airbrush mode to smooth, and let's just bring down the strength and smooth that area off a little bit. And that's looking a lot better. So let's have a look. We will smooth off that valley just a little bit more, then turn airbrush mode off. We'll reduce the radius and increase the strength back up, and then let's drop both sides of the valley down and keep that ridge nice and pronounced. We need the background mountain to start here behind this peak, and it just covers the entire area. So what we'll do is jump out of our camera, of course in the viewport. Increase the radius. Let's go for 250. We'll increase the strength again up to 100, and let's just pinch and pull that whole area up. And all we need to do is keep in mind either the reference image or when we're in our camera how the viewport looks. And it's that top left hand side of the image or the viewport that really is just a massive mountain. So we can afford to continue to raise this up until it really does match that composition. So a little bit higher, and then we'll smooth it off as well. So let's just reduce that radius and bring it up, and then we'll flip over to the smooth mode and let's just smooth off that mountain. We need to reduce the strength, otherwise the smoothing is going to be too intense. So there we go, that matches our scene almost perfectly. So now we have our terrain set up, we're going to focus on drawing in that background road. We've got our foreground terrain disabled and any unnecessary operators. We'll go to the spline pen tool, enable snapping, and make sure that we are snapping to points. So therefore when we draw our spline, it's going to be completely aligned to our terrain. Perfect for the path operator. So let's make this road fairly rough. We're not too fussed about the accuracy of its design, and we're just going to start bringing in those points and creating a version of the road that we see in our reference image. Okay, let's jump out of the camera and continue to wind that road around the mountains, and we'll come back when we've got it designed. So now we've got our background spline drawn. Looks great. Let's copy and paste the path operator from our foreground terrain and paste it into our background terrain so all the settings are the same. So in our background terrain path operator, we can swap this now with our background path spline. We can now see that path carved into the background mountainscape. We could also copy and paste our road object, and the spline inside of this road object can be swapped either with our path spline, or if we want to have a bit more precision, we could duplicate this again and make a road spline and then alter those points like we did before. Let's leave it like this for now, and if we need to have a bit more control, we can always go back into that. Okay, let's compare this with the pitch viewer. That's fine for our scene. You can always spend a bit more time getting that perfect if you want to. Now let's make these barriers on the road, and then to finish up the scene we're going to add some textures, throw on the sky and the environment, and then we'll compare our work with the original reference. So let's go to the view panel and we'll fold down our terrains and our spline group. Just hide those splines from the scene. And in our foreground road, let's just bring this up, we want to be cloning along the road. So we'll enable this. We're going to use multi-instances to ensure that our scene is nice and fast. And let's create a cube, and this cube is going to be 1 centimeter on the X, 4 centimeters on the Y, and let's go with 4 centimeters on the Z, and we can always come back to this if we need to change the size. We'll put this inside of a group called Scene Objects. Pop this at the bottom, and let's rename this Barrier. And in our TerraformFX Road, we can now drag and drop that into the Clone Along Road Objects menu. And now you can see we are cloning those barriers along the road. Now let's go back to the barrier and turn on filleting. And in the road object again, let's go down and click this barrier. And we're going to have, let's say 300 for now. Let's see how that looks. We can pull these out towards the edge of our road. And that looks really good, but you can see we're starting to lose the barriers here on the bottom. So let's just go back to the road and bring those barriers in ever so slightly. Let's put this at -8. And what we can do to make sure that we retain our barriers here, we can see that we're losing them in the terrain, is, let's just turn off that snapping. Go to our path operator and just play again with these handles just to squeeze the best out of those barriers, because they add a really nice amount of detail to the scene. Okay, so we need to call this barrier 1. We'll duplicate this to have barrier 2. Go back to our road, drag and drop this into our Clone Along Road object menu again, and let's just duplicate these settings. So 300, this is going to be +8 on the move, and there we go. So we have our barriers in the scene. Let's create the signs that we can see in the reference. So we have these really small red signs. So here you can see the sign that we've created. It consists just of 2 cylinders. We'll copy and paste this into our Guilin scene, put it into the Scene Objects group, and then we'll take it into the Foreground Road object and drag it into the Clone Along Road Objects menu. So let's lift those signs up on the Y-axis. We'll push them out towards the edge of the road as well, and let's also increase their scale. We don't need so many signs, so we can reduce the count to around 5, and let's change the spline offset to reposition them. Let's flip over their position so they're on the other side of the road. So we'll change the move from -8 to +8. Okay, so there we go. We have our scene set up and ready to add some textures and our environment lighting. So we'll go to the light rig and make our sky visible again. Then we'll go to the material manager and apply some of these preset materials. We'll apply the TerraformFX materials first, and if you'd like to know more about how these have been constructed, go to the TerraformFX terrain video manual. So let's apply the foreground material first, and then we need to swap over the road material. So we'll drag over this new road material whilst holding down Alt and drop it onto the existing tag. Then we'll do the same for our background. And our distant terrain as well. Now we just need to texture our scene objects. So we have the sign first. Let's apply the sign material and the pole. And then the barriers will get this barrier material. Great, now we can go to the light rig group and make our environment visible. And to finish off the scene, let's turn on our depth of field. So we've used TerraformFX to build this amazing Guilin landscape in Cinema 4D. We've sculpted those beautiful mountains with the grid operator, we've made waif our road with the path operator, and then we've used the TerraformFX Road Object to lay our road down and clone objects along the road.